Daniel Dillon, The Stolen Memory, written by Tane Blackadder, read by Arthur Howard. It was one of those days that felt stolen from a different life. The sun, a rare and generous guest in our city, poured through the grimy window of Mel's griddle, painting the dusty air with lazy golden beams. For the first time in memory, the glass wasn't weeping with rain. The usual atmosphere of damp melancholy had been replaced by a warm, almost peaceful haze. It felt wrong, this brightness. Our booth was a place for shadows, for conversations held in low tones under a sky the color of bruised steel. The sunshine felt like an intrusion, a lie, and perhaps it was that very dissonance that made Anya Petrova's arrival so profoundly unsettling. She stepped into the diner, blinking against the unaccustomed light, and looked as out of place as a ghost at a wedding. She was a woman in her late 30s, with a sharp, intelligent face that was now clouded by a deep, fundamental confusion. She moved to our booth with the hesitant steps of a sleepwalker, her posture rigid with a fear that was all the more terrifying for its silence. This wasn't the raw, weeping panic of a Daryl Button searching for a sister, or the controlled political terror of an Eric Harris. This was something new. This was the quiet horror of a mind that had turned on itself. "My name is Anya Petrova," she said, her voice a thin, careful thread, as if speaking too loudly might shatter her tenuous grip on reality. I was a historian." The past tense hung in the sunny air, heavy with implication. She accepted the mug of tea Sarah offered, with a grateful, trembling nod. "I woke up yesterday morning," she began, her gaze fixed on the steaming liquid as if it were a scrying pool that might show her the truth. "In my own bed. My alarm clock went off at 7, just like it always does, but everything was wrong." She explained that the last thing she clearly, solidly remembered was a dinner with a colleague from the university archives 14 days ago. The 2 weeks that followed were not a blur. They were nothing, a perfect, absolute blank, a void where a chunk of her life should have been. "But my body remembers," she whispered, her composure cracking. With a reluctant, shuddering movement, she pushed up the sleeve of her cardigan. There, on her wrists, were faint but unmistakable yellowing bruises, the kind left by something tight and unyielding. They were not the marks of a fall. They were the signature of restraint. "And I found these." She slid a small, neat pile of paper slips across the formica. They were mundane artifacts of a life being lived, a receipt for a full tank of premium gasoline from a station 200 miles away, dated 5 days ago. A credit card slip for a diner called the Crossroads Diner in a town I'd never heard of. A toll road ticket for a route that led deep into a remote, mountainous region. Daniel picked up the receipts, his fingers careful, as if they were forensic evidence. He didn't look at Anya, he looked at the paper, his mind already dissecting the geography of her amnesia. "You have no memory of these places, the drive, the meal?" "None," Anya said, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "It's like someone else was living my life, using my car, my credit cards, and then they put me back, tucked me into my own bed like a library book that had been checked out and returned." The analogy was chilling, coming from a historian. An object, used, and then placed back on the shelf. I felt that familiar cold dread coiling in my stomach, the same sensation I'd had when Henry Claymore talked about his brother vanishing from a flight manifest. It was the feeling of reality developing a crack. But this was different. This wasn't a body gone missing, it was a mind. Sarah, her nurse's instincts taking over, reached out and gently took Anya's hand. "Have you seen a doctor? Had any scans?" "Yes," Anya nodded. "Everything is normal. No head trauma. No drugs in my system. The doctor said it was likely dissociative amnesia brought on by extreme stress." "But what stress?" "I don't remember any stress. I just remember nothing." Daniel's eyes met mine across the table. In them I saw the same grim conclusion. The clean bill of health made it worse. This wasn't an accident, this was deliberate. This was a new kind of ghost, more insidious than any we'd faced before. We'd dealt with people who were erased, like Lena Button. We'd dealt with memories used as weapons, like in the Harris blackmail. But this was an erasure and a return. A perfect, silent crime. "We'll need access to your bank statements, your phone records," I said, my accountant's mind already reaching for the digital threads. "We'll retrace the steps you can't remember." The investigation began under that deceptive, cheerful sun. While Daniel prepared to physically follow the trail laid out by the receipts, Sarah and I began our digital excavation of Anya's life. The contrast between the bright day and the darkness we were uncovering was jarring. Her financials were a map to a stranger's journey. The charges were methodical, purposeful. There were no impulsive purchases, no tourist souvenirs. It was fuel, food, and a single large cash withdrawal from an ATM in a town called Silverwood, the same town near the toll road. The pattern was chillingly efficient. "It's like a business trip," I murmured to Sarah, pointing at the screen. The expenses of someone on the clock. Her phone records were even more telling. For the entire 2-week period, the device had been used only for GPS navigation and a handful of brief incoming calls from a series of untraceable burners. There were no calls to friends, no texts, no social media use. The vibrant digital life of Anya Petrova had been switched off. The phone had become a tool, not a connection. Meanwhile, Daniel drove the route, visiting the gas station, the Crossroads diner. He showed Anya's photo. The attendants were vague, but the waitress at the diner remembered her. "She was quiet," the woman told Daniel over the phone, his voice on speaker as we listened in the booth. "Pale, looked tired. She sat in a booth by herself, ate a full breakfast, paid in cash, and left. Didn't say 2 words. I thought she was just a tired trucker." The description painted a picture of a woman in a trance, an automaton following a program. The break came from the most modern of relics, a traffic camera. Using the timestamps from the receipts, I managed to track down a state traffic camera feed overlooking the highway near the Silverwood ATM. The footage was grainy, but it was undeniable. It showed Anya's car, but she wasn't driving. In the driver's seat was a man with a cap pulled low over his eyes. Anya was in the passenger seat, her posture slumped, her head leaning against the window. She looked asleep, or unconscious. The relief that she hadn't been acting alone was immediately eclipsed by a colder, deeper fear. This was a kidnapping, but a kidnapping that ended with the victim returned home, unharmed, but minus 2 weeks of their life. "They're not asking for ransom," Sarah said, her voice tight. "So what are they taking?" The answer, we suspected, was in Silverwood. Daniel, using the last of the daylight, scouted the area around where the ATM photo was taken. It was a remote, heavily wooded region dotted with abandoned mining claims and a few surviving closed-mouth communities. He found what he was looking for on the second day, a private, gated road with a discreet sign that read, "Northwood Bioreclamation Facility." It was a bland, innocent name for a place that had a formidable security fence, cameras, and a guardhouse. "Bioreclamation," I repeated, the term sparking a connection in my mind. I dove back into the digital world, pulling permits, corporate registries. The company was a shell, but its parent company was one I'd seen before, a minor subsidiary in the vast, tangled web that was Etherius Corp. The name was like a cold hand on my neck. We were back in the belly of the beast. The pieces were forming a terrifying picture. Anya Petrova wasn't a random target. She was a historian with a specialty in 20th century industrial archives. What if Etherius, or a faction within it, needed something only she could provide? A piece of information buried in old records, a specific technical schematic. They couldn't just steal it. They needed her expertise to find it, to understand it. So, they'd taken her. They'd extracted what they needed, and then, using God knows what method, they'd wiped her mind clean and returned her. A perfect, untraceable crime. She was the ultimate ghost, a living woman who had been temporarily possessed. We had to get inside that facility. Our plan was a desperate gamble. We would use the cover of the ongoing sunny weather, which made the idea of a hiker getting lost vaguely plausible. Daniel would create a diversion near the perimeter fence, drawing security. Meanwhile, I would use a drone I'd retrofitted for silent flight to get a bird's-eye view, looking for any clue, a vehicle, a layout, anything we could use. The day of the operation, the sun was still blazing, mocking our grim purpose. We parked a mile away and moved through the pine forest, the scent of dry needles thick in the air. The facility was larger than it appeared from the road, a cluster of nondescript buildings in the center of a cleared area. Daniel melted into the trees to begin his diversion. Sarah and I found a vantage point. My hands were slick with sweat as I launched the drone. It rose silently, a tiny eye in the vast blue sky. The feed came back crisp and clear. The facility looked boring. There were a few trucks, a parking lot. And then I saw it. Parked near the back of the main building was Anya Petrova's sedan. "Daniel, we have confirmation. The car is here," I whispered into the comms unit. His response was a burst of static, then a grunt of effort. "Good. Diversion in 3, 2. A loud crack echoed through the woods, followed by the sound of a falling tree branch. Daniel's idea of a hiker in trouble. Instantly, 2 security guards emerged from the guardhouse and jogged toward the sound. "They're moving," Sarah said, her binoculars trained on the compound. "The main gate is unguarded." This was our chance. We hadn't planned on going in, but the opportunity was too perfect. "Daniel, we're going for a closer look," I said, my heart hammering. "Negative, Michael. Too risky." But Sarah was already moving, a determined set to her jaw. "We have to know what's in there." We slipped through the now unguarded gate and darted toward the main building. A side door was unlocked, a catastrophic security failure, or a trap. We slipped inside. The interior was a shock. It wasn't an industrial plant, it was a hospital. The corridors were stark white, lit by fluorescent lights, smelling of antiseptic. Rooms lined the hall, their doors featuring small, reinforced windows. I peered into one. It was a cell containing a single bed. The bed was empty, but the sheets were rumpled. We heard voices coming from a room at the end of the hall. We crept closer. The door was ajar. Inside, 2 men in lab coats were speaking. "The Petrova extraction was a success. The neural mapping is complete. The wipe was clean," one said. "Good. Prep the next subject, the financier from Singapore. We need his access codes. Schedule the pickup for tonight." My blood ran cold. This was a factory for the theft of information, using human beings as temporary storage devices. They were picking up people, extracting what they needed and then wiping them clean before returning them. The stolen memory wasn't a condition, it was a product. A floorboard creaked under Sarah's foot. The men in the lab coats froze, then turned. Their eyes widened. One reached for an alarm button on the wall. There was no time to think. I did the only thing I could. I threw my body against the door, slamming it shut on them. "Run!" I yelled at Sarah. We fled back down the corridor, the sounds of shouting and the blaring alarm erupting behind us. We burst out of the side door into the blinding sunlight just as Daniel emerged from the tree line, his face a mask of fury and fear. Security guards were converging from all directions. What followed was a frantic, desperate chase through the woods, a chaotic blur of snapping branches and shouted commands. We only escaped because Daniel led us to a steep, rocky creek bed the guards couldn't follow. Our clothes soaked, our lungs burning. Back in the city, as the sun finally set, painting the sky in hues of fire, we sat in the booth, exhausted and shell-shocked. We had the truth, but it was a truth so large and sinister we had no idea what to do with it. How do you prove a crime when the victim doesn't know they were a victim? We told Anya everything. The relief on her face that she wasn't going insane was quickly replaced by a new, profound horror. She had been used. Her mind had been violated. "What did they take from me?" she asked, her voice hollow. "We may never know," Daniel said softly. "But you're safe now. And you're not alone." As Anya left, armed with a truth that was its own kind of prison, a heavy silence fell over our booth. The sunny day was gone, and the familiar gloom of the diner felt like a homecoming. Daniel looked at Sarah, who was shivering slightly from the adrenaline crash and the cold creek water. Without a word, he took off his worn leather jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was simple, but the intimacy of it was profound. She looked up at him, and for a long moment they just looked at each other, the unspoken words between them louder than any alarm. "They're not just stealing secrets," Sarah finally said, pulling the jacket tighter. "They're stealing lives and putting them back on the shelf emptier. How do you fight that?" "You fight it by being a thorn in their side," Daniel replied, his gaze shifting to the phone on the counter. "You fight it by remembering for the people who can't." The phone rang, its shrill cry a familiar summons. The stolen sun was a memory. The storm was our natural state. Daniel, Sarah, and I looked at each other. We were bruised, battered, and burdened with a terrible new knowledge. But we were together. Daniel reached out and squeezed Sarah's hand once, briefly, before standing to answer the call. The memory of what we'd seen was a fresh wound, but it was a memory we all shared, and for now that was the only weapon we had.